The first log came out of the swamp at 6:17 on a cold October morning. Delphine Ashcroft stood ankle-deep in black water, 67 years old. A widow of 2 years, her hands, steady as a surgeon's, gripped the control of an old logging winch. The steel cable tightened until it hummed in the cold air. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the mud moved. Bubbles broke the surface 20 yards away. Reeds leaned sideways. Somewhere beneath the water, something enormous was shifting. Something that had been sleeping for a very long time. Delphine did not breathe. The winch groaned. The cable pulled tighter. And slowly, the swamp gave up what it had been hiding. One end of a massive trunk rose through the black water. 3 feet, 6, 10. Mud rolled from the wood like something bleeding. Almost 3 feet across. No bark, no branches. Just a long, dark trunk stained the color of old iron. Delphine knelt down. She placed her weathered hand on the wet wood. She whispered, "Harold, I hope you can see this." She did not know it yet. But this single log was the first of 1,700. And every one of them was going to change her life. To understand how a 67-year-old widow ended up standing in a swamp, before dawn, pulling logs out of the mud with her own hands, you have to go back, 6 months back, to a rainy afternoon in early April, when Delphine Ashcroft made the strangest decision of her life. The real estate agent had a soft handshake and a nervous smile. His name was Preston Wren. He was 32 years old. He wore a tie that was too tight. He carried a leather folder that clearly had not been opened in weeks. And he clearly did not want to be standing in the rain, showing a farm to a woman who reminded him of his grandmother. "Mrs. Ashcroft," he said, "I have to be honest with you. This property has been on the market for almost 3 years. I know. The house needs work. I saw. The barn roof is. I saw that too." Preston shifted his weight. Rain dripped off the brim of his hat. He looked, Delphine thought, like a man who had already lost the sale in his head. Like a man rehearsing the polite words he would use to explain to his supervisor why the old woman had walked away. "There's a reason nobody's bought it." Delphine looked at him. Just looked. She had the kind of eyes that had watched people die. Eyes that had held the hands of strangers in hospital rooms at 3 in the morning. Eyes that did not look away. Preston looked at his shoes. "Show me the South 40, she said. He winced, because that was the part he did not want to show her. They walked, past the leaning fence posts, past the tired pasture, past the old shed with its collapsing walls. And then the ground began to change. It grew softer, wetter. Delphine's boots made a sucking sound with every step. Preston stopped 20 feet from the water. "That's the South 40, he said. His voice was almost apologetic. Delphine looked past him, and she saw it. 40 acres of black water. Reeds, willows, alders growing wild and crowded. Their branches tangled together like the fingers of people praying. In some places the water was still. In others it moved slowly, as if something beneath it was breathing. For a moment, she could not look away. She had grown up in a city. She had lived her whole adult life in a small suburban house, with a small suburban yard. She had never in her life seen a piece of ground that looked alive in quite this way. "Nothing much you can do with that section," Preston said. "Drain it." He shook his head. "Probably cost more than it's worth. More than it's worth." That sentence would stay with her. For months. For years. She did not know it yet. But those 5 words were the beginning of everything. "How much for the whole property?" she asked. Preston named a number. It was low. Embarrassingly low. Delphine did the math in her head. She had spent 44 years as a nurse. She had watched her husband, Harold, die of pancreatic cancer 2 years ago. She had sold the house in the city. She had a little money set aside. Not much, but enough. Enough for this. "I'll take it," she said. Preston blinked. "Ma'am, I don't think you understand what you're..." I understand perfectly, Delphine said. Draw up the papers. She turned to go. Then she stopped. She looked back at the black water one more time. And for reasons she could not explain, not then, she felt something. A pull. A tug. Like the swamp knew her name. She shook her head. Foolish old woman. That's what her daughter would call her. She was right about that. Cordelia Ashcroft found out over the phone. She was 30 years old. She lived in a nice apartment. She had a nice job, a nice boyfriend, a nice, controlled, predictable life. Her mother had just blown all of that up. You did what? I bought a farm, dear. A farm? Yes. Mother, you are 67 years old. I'm aware of my age, Cordelia. You've never farmed anything in your life. That's true. You don't own a tractor. I'll get one. You. Cordelia stopped. She pressed her fingers to her forehead. She took a long breath. Delphine could picture her. In her nice apartment, looking at the ceiling, trying to remain calm. Mother, she said, please, come stay with me. In the city, there's a beautiful assisted living facility 3 blocks from my apartment. I already toured it. They have a garden. You could have a garden there. Silence on the line. Delphine, don't call me that. You are being reckless. You are being... I am being alive, her mother said, quietly, firmly. For the first time in 2 years, I am being alive. The line went quiet again. Cordelia, Delphine said, I loved your father. I nursed him. I held his hand. I watched him leave. And then I sat in that empty house for 2 years, waiting. And I finally understood something. What? I wasn't waiting for anything to come. I was waiting for something to end. Cordelia's throat tightened. Her mother could hear it, even over the phone. Mother, I bought the farm. It's done. I move next week. And then Delphine hung up, because she knew, if she stayed on the line, her daughter would find the words. The ones that would break her. The ones that would make her doubt. And she could not afford to doubt. Not now. Not ever again. She set the phone down on the counter. She stared at it for a long moment. She almost wanted it to ring again. She almost wanted her daughter to call back. So she could apologize. So she could soften it. So she could say the things a good mother says. But the phone did not ring. And Delphine, after a moment, was glad. The farmhouse was worse than the photos. Delphine stood in the kitchen on her first morning. Coffee in her hand. A crack in the ceiling. A window that would not shut. A refrigerator that made a sound like a dying animal. She smiled, because it was hers. All of it. The crack. The window. The dying refrigerator. Every terrible, wonderful piece of it. She spent the first 2 weeks doing the sensible things. She patched the roof of the barn. She fixed the fence in the north pasture. She cleared brush from a field she thought she might use for something someday. She unpacked her boxes. She hung Harold's photograph in the hallway, where she could see it every time she walked past. Sometimes she talked to the photograph. She did not tell anyone that. She avoided the South 40, because Preston had been right. It was more trouble than it was worth. She told herself that. Every morning, every night. She was almost starting to believe it. Then she went into town for groceries, and her whole world tilted sideways. The store was called Millard's General. It was the only grocery for 15 miles. Smelled like coffee and old wood. Delphine was standing in front of the eggs, trying to remember if she needed a dozen or 2, when she heard a voice behind her. Del? She froze. Nobody had called her Del in 50 years. She turned around slowly, and she saw her, Rosalind Merriwether, 65 years old. Silver hair pulled back in a loose braid, a basket over one arm, eyes that were exactly the same eyes Delphine had known when they were 15, sitting on the bleachers, sharing secrets, believing the world was theirs. Roz! Oh my lord! They stood there, in the middle of the egg aisle, 2 old women, both of them shaking. Roz! Roz, is it? Delegate Del, is that you? They dropped their baskets. They walked toward each other. And in the middle of Millard's General, in front of the eggs, and the display of on-sale cereal, they wrapped their arms around each other. And they cried. They cried the way old women cry when they realize how much time has passed, how much has been lost, how much can still be found. The clerk pretended not to look. Later, they sat in Rosalind's kitchen. It was small, warm. It smelled like bread. There was a picture of a man on the wall. Kind eyes. Soft smile. "Walter?" Delphine asked. Rosalind nodded. "6 years ago. Heart. I'm so sorry. You?" "Harold. 2 years. Cancer." They did not need to say more. They were widows. They knew. "Where are you living?" Rosalind asked. "I bought a farm, just north of here." Rosalind's eyebrows went up. "You bought a farm?" "The old Whitcomb place." Rosalind put down her teacup. "Delaware. That place has been for sale forever. There's a reason. The South 40. The swamp." "Yes." Rosalind studied her old friend. "What are you going to do with it?" Delphine looked out the window. She did not know. Not yet. "Nothing," she said. Probably, but she was lying. And Rosalind, who had known her since they were both 15, could tell. "Delaware? Yes. You never did nothing in your life." Delphine smiled. A small smile. The first real one in 2 years. "No," she said. "I suppose I didn't." They talked for hours that afternoon. About their husbands. About their children. About the 50 years that had passed since they had last seen each other. Rosalind had moved to this valley when she married Walter. Delphine had stayed in the city. Life had done what life does. Pulled them apart. Filled their days with other people. Other loves. Other losses. When Delphine finally stood up to leave, Rosalind grabbed her hand. "Delaware? Yes. Don't wait 50 years this time." "I won't. Promise me." "I promise." She drove home in the fading light, her hands on the steering wheel, her mind full of memories, of a girl she had almost forgotten she had been. And she felt, for the first time in 2 years, something that was not quite grief. Something that was almost, something like hope. 3 weeks later, the spring rain came. It fell for 6 days straight. Filled every ditch, every low spot, every quiet, forgotten corner of the property. And it made the South 40 grow. The swamp expanded, pushed past its usual boundaries. Water crept toward the pasture. Reeds bent under the weight of it. Delphine was fixing a fence near the edge when she saw it. A shape, long dark, just beneath the surface. She stopped. She stared. She had assumed, all her life, that fallen trees looked a certain way. Random, broken, scattered. But this shape was straight. Too straight. She walked closer. Water lapped over the tops of her boots. She did not care. She saw another shape, parallel to the first. Then a third. She stood very still. Her heart began to beat harder than it should have. She did not know why. She just knew that something was wrong. Or right. She could not tell which. She went back to the barn. She found a length of rebar. Rusted. Bent. It had been in the tool crib for probably 20 years. She carried it back to the swamp. She waded out. 10 feet. 15. She stopped at the first shape. She raised the rebar. And she pushed it down into the mud. Clunk. Wood. She moved 10 feet. Pushed again. Clunk. Wood. She moved 15 feet. Pushed. Clunk. Her hands started to shake. She pushed again. And again. And again. Every time. Every single time. The rebar hit something solid. Something that should not have been there. She stood in the water for a long time. The sun moved across the sky. Her boots filled with cold water. She did not notice. Because Delphine Ashcroft was starting to understand something. The swamp was not empty. The swamp was full. Full of something. That evening, she drove into town. She went to the hardware store. She bought a box of orange survey flags. The clerk looked at her. "Marking property lines?" he asked. "Something like that," Delphine said. She drove home in the dark. The flags rattled on the passenger seat. 23 of them. She did not know it yet, but she was going to need a lot more. She started the next morning at dawn. She waded into the swamp with her rebar and her flags. Every time she hit wood, she pushed a flag into the nearest patch of mud. Every flag was another mystery, another buried thing, another question she could not answer. By noon, 23 flags stood among the reeds. By evening, she had walked to the hardware store to buy more. The clerk did not ask this time. He just handed her the box. She was still marking flags when Rosalind pulled up in her old brown truck. Delaware. Roz, what in the world are you doing? Delphine straightened up. Her back ached. Her hands were black with mud. Her hair had come loose from its clip. She looked, she thought, like a woman who had lost her mind. She looked at Rosalind, and she said very calmly, "There is something buried in my swamp." Rosalind blinked. "Something? Trees, I think. A lot of them." "How many?" Delphine looked out at the reeds, at the flags, at the black water that stretched all the way to the tree line. "I don't know," she said, "but it's a lot." Rosalind stood there a moment. She looked at her old friend. She looked at the swamp. She looked at the box of flags. Then she walked to her truck. She pulled out a pair of rubber boots. She sat down on the tailgate, and she started putting them on. "What are you doing?" Delphine asked. "Helping you," Rosalind said. "Roz, you don't have to." "Delaware. I have been alone in that little house for 6 years. Do you know how long it's been since anybody needed my help with anything?" Delphine looked at her. "I'm going to help you count trees," Rosalind said. "You cannot stop me." Delphine did not try to stop her. Instead, she smiled. And then, for the second time in a week, she cried. Just a little. The two old women waded into the swamp together. They worked through the afternoon. They worked into the evening. They stopped only when the light failed. And by the time they climbed back to the farmhouse, exhausted, hungry, covered in mud, from their knees down, they had planted almost 60 flags. Rosalind stayed for dinner. She stayed to help wash the mud from Delphine's hair. She stayed to eat scrambled eggs at the kitchen table, because neither of them had the energy to cook anything real. Rosalind said, chewing thoughtfully. "Yes, you know we're going to have to figure out what these are." "I know, and what to do with them." "I know that too." Rosalind looked at her. "You're not scared." Delphine thought about it. She thought about being 67, about being alone, about all the things she did not know, all the things she had never done. "No," she said, finally. "I'm not scared. I'm the opposite of scared. I don't have a word for what I am." Rosalind nodded slowly. "Curious." "Yes, curious. I remember when we were 15. You were the curious one. You always wanted to know how things worked." "Was I?" "Delaware. You dissected a frog in 10th grade and cried because you wanted to put it back together." Delphine laughed. She had forgotten that. She had forgotten so many things. "Well," she said, "maybe I still want to put things back together." Rosalind was quiet for a long time. Then she said very softly, "Maybe that's exactly what this is, Delaware. Maybe that's exactly what this is." The first cut changed everything. It was a warm morning in early June. Delphine had brought a chainsaw, old, rusty. It had belonged to Harold, back when he still had the strength to use it. She had not touched it in 3 years. She fueled it. She checked the chain. She pulled the cord. It started on the second try. She waded out to the closest log. A small one, barely 2 feet across, half its length exposed above the water. She squeezed the trigger. The chain bit into the black surface. Dark fragments sprayed. Water, mud, softened debris. Then the sawdust changed. Delphine let off the throttle. She lowered the saw. She stared at the ground around her boots. Black debris, yes, but mixed into it now. Something else. Something warm, brown, then gold. She dropped to her knees in the water. She did not care about her clothes. She did not care about the cold. She picked up a handful of the fresh sawdust. She held it close to her face. It smelled like a forest, like a living forest. She knew wood, not much, but some. Harold had taught her a little back when he was building the bookshelves in the den. And what she knew told her that what she was holding in her hand was not right. Because this log had been underwater for a very long time. It should have been rotten, soft, crumbling. It should have fallen apart the moment the saw touched it. Instead, beneath a shell of black stain, there was pale, solid, living-looking wood. Delphine sat back on her heels. Water soaked through her jeans, and her mind, her steady nurse's mind, went to the one place it knew. She had worked in a hospital for 44 years. She had watched countless tissues go into countless jars of preservative. She had learned the science of it. She understood the principle. Certain substances, certain conditions, cold, dark, airless, they stopped things from breaking down. Anaerobic preservation. The swamp was doing that. To wood. It was doing it to wood. She began to laugh. Softly at first, then harder, sitting in the mud, with her hair coming loose, and her boots full of water, and her hands stained black. An old woman, laughing in a swamp, alone, except she was not alone, because Rosalind was on the shore, watching her, smiling, because she had known Delphine Ashcroft for 50 years, and she had never, in all those 50 years, seen her friend laugh like that. Del, Rosalind called. Delphine looked up. Roz, she said. Roz, there is something here. The old man came the following week. His name was Thaddeus Holbrook. He was 80 years old. He had lived in the valley his whole life. His father had lived there before him, and his father before that. Delphine had never met him, but everyone in the valley knew Thaddeus. He drove up to the farmhouse in a truck that was older than most of her furniture. He got out slowly. He was tall, thin. His hands were the hands of a man who had worked outside for 80 years. Weathered, strong, scarred. He walked toward her. He did not smile. You're the widow who bought the Whitcomb place. I am. You're pulling logs out of the South 40. I've cut one. He was quiet for a moment. He looked past her, toward the swamp. May I see it? He asked. Delphine led him down. The cut log lay on the bank, where she had dragged it. The freshly sawn end was still visible, pale gold in the dark surface. Thaddeus stopped a few feet from the log. He did not go closer. For a long time he just looked. Then he took off his hat. He held it against his chest. Delphine watched him. Something in her stomach tightened. Mr. Holbrook, she said. Are you all right? He did not answer. Finally he spoke, quietly, almost to himself. So, he said, it is real. Delphine felt the hair on her arms rise. What is real? She asked. Thaddeus looked at her. His eyes were wet. She had not expected that. Not from a man like him. Mrs. Ashcroft, he said, do you know what people used to say about this piece of land? No, she said. They said this ground carried a story. From my father's time. And his father's. Not a happy story. What story? He shook his head. Slowly. I'm too tired to tell it today, he said. And you're too new to hear it. But I'll say this. He put his hat back on. He looked at the log. Someone put those trees under that water, he said. A long, long time ago. And it wasn't nature that did it. Delphine's mouth went dry. Mr. Holbrook. Yes. How many trees are down there? The old man looked at her. For a long moment, his eyes were kind, and sad, and full of something she could not read. More than you can imagine, he said. And then he turned, and he walked back to his truck. And he drove away, without saying goodbye, without saying he would come back, leaving Delphine standing beside a log that had suddenly become something more than a log. She stood there for a long time, watching the black water, wondering what she had bought. That night, She and Rosalind sat on the porch of the farmhouse. It was warm. Fireflies moved through the pasture. Somewhere in the distance, a bullfrog called. Delphine had made tea. They both cradled their cups. Neither of them drank. Del, Rosalind said finally. Yes. You could stop. I know. You could sell it. Now, before you know what's down there, you could take what you have. Move somewhere quiet. Rest. Delphine looked out at the dark. Somewhere out there was the swamp. Silent. Patient. Roz, she said, can I tell you something? Anything. For 44 years I took care of other people. I did their charts. I changed their bandages. I held their hands. And when I came home I took care of Harold. And when he got sick, I took care of him even harder. And when he died, I sat in a house full of his things, and I took care of nothing. Because there was nothing left to take care of. Rosalind reached over. She took Delphine's hand. And then I found this, Delphine said. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's worth anything. I don't know if it will ruin me. But for the first time in 2 years, for the first time, there is something in front of me that is mine. She turned. She looked at her friend. I have to know what it is, she said. Do you understand? Rosalind squeezed her hand. Yes, she said. I understand. They sat in silence a while longer. Then Rosalind said, So what do we do next? Delphine smiled. We count them, she said. All of them. She did not sleep well that night. She kept thinking about Thaddeus Holbrook's face. The way he had held his hat against his chest. The way he had said, It is real. She kept thinking about the way the swamp had looked in the moonlight when she went to bed. Silver black. Alive. She kept thinking about what he had said. Someone put those trees under that water. Who? Why? At 3 a.m, she got out of bed. She walked to the kitchen. She stood at the window that looked south. She could not see the swamp from the window, but she could feel it. Waiting, she poured herself a glass of water. She drank it slowly, and she thought about her life. She thought about being a girl of 15, sitting on bleachers with Rosalind, laughing about boys. She thought about nursing school, her first patient, the way her hands had shaken. She thought about meeting Harold at a hospital fundraiser, his terrible dancing, his good laugh. She thought about their wedding, their small, quiet wedding, Cordelia's birth, the night she brought her home from the hospital, the way she had stood over the crib in the dark, terrified, certain she would do everything wrong. She thought about the years passing, so fast, so impossibly fast. She thought about Harold's diagnosis, the doctor's face, the long slow drive home, neither of them speaking. She thought about the last night, the way she had held his hand, the way he had looked at her, the way he had said, Delegate, don't stop. She had not understood what he meant. Not then. Now she stood in a farmhouse kitchen at 3 a.m, 67 years old, and she thought maybe she understood. Don't stop. She looked out the window, into the dark. I won't, she whispered, and then, because there was nothing else to do at 3 a.m, she went back to bed. And this time, she slept. Summer moved into autumn. Delphine and Rosalind spent almost every day in the swamp. They marked flags. They probed with the rebar. They counted. And counted. And counted. The number kept climbing. 50 flags. 100. 200. 3. Delphine started keeping a notebook. She wrote down every location, every approximate depth, every guess about size. Her nurse's handwriting. Careful. Small. Precise. Rosalind laughed at her. You're charting a swamp, Delaware. I am charting a swamp, Delphine agreed. And she was. By September they had marked over 400 logs. And they were nowhere near finished. Delphine understood, by then, that this was too big for 2 old women with rebar and flags. She would need equipment. She would need help. She would need money. She had almost no money. She sat with Rosalind one evening at the kitchen table. She spread her savings account statement between them. She spread her list of expenses. She spread her hopes. They did not match. Rosalind said gently. This can't work. I know. Have you thought about selling one? Every day. Then. I don't know what they're worth, Roz. I don't know if anyone will buy one. I don't know if I can even get one out of the mud without breaking my back. Rosalind was quiet. Then she said, so we figure out how. Delphine looked up. We. Delphine felt her eyes sting. She looked away so her friend would not see. The next morning, she called a small mill 60 miles away. She described what she had. A log from the swamp. She asked if she could bring one in. See what they thought. The man on the other end laughed at her. Not cruelly, just disbelievingly. Lady, he said, you want to bring me a wet log out of a swamp? Yes. Do you know how much a log weighs? I have a rough idea. Do you have a truck? I have a small one. He laughed again, kinder this time. Ma'am, I don't want to be rude, but you cannot move a swamp log with a small truck. Delphine closed her eyes. Is there someone in this area? She said. Who knows how to do this? The man was quiet a moment. Then he said, there's a young fellow, Coleman, Wyatt Coleman. He does salvage, odd jobs, custom milling. If anybody would take a call like this, it'd be him. He gave her a number. Delphine wrote it down. She stared at it for a long time. Then she picked up the phone, and she dialed. The phone rang 4 times. A man's voice answered. Rough, young, not friendly. Coleman. Mr. Coleman. My name is Delphine Ashcroft. I bought the old Whitcomb farm. Okay. I have something on my property. What kind of something? She took a breath. Trees, she said. Under my swamp. Old ones. A lot of them. I want to get them out. There was a long silence on the other end. Then, very slowly, Wyatt Coleman said, Ma'am, are you serious? Yes. How many? I've marked 400 so far. I don't think I'm halfway. Another long silence. Ma'am. Yes. Nobody around here does that kind of work. I understand. It's expensive. It's dangerous. Most of what you'd pull up would be rotten. I understand that too. Ma'am, respectfully, this sounds like an old lady with more time than sense. Delphine gripped the phone tighter. She thought about telling him off. She thought about hanging up. Instead, she said, quietly, Mr. Coleman, I'm 67 years old. I lost my husband 2 years ago. I have very little time, and I have never had more sense than I do right now. Will you come look at what I have? Or not? There was a long silence. Then he said, Where are you? She gave him the address. I'll come Saturday. He hung up. Delphine sat at her kitchen table, her hand shaking on the phone. She did not know it yet, but that phone call was the second most important thing she would do that year. The most important thing was still waiting, under the black water, in the cold October dark. Wyatt Coleman was going to change everything. But not yet. Not quite yet. Saturday came. At 6:15 in the morning, Wyatt Coleman's truck pulled up the long dirt driveway. He was 38 years old. Broad shoulders, tired eyes, a beard that needed trimming. He got out. He looked at the house. He looked at the barn. He looked at Delphine standing on the porch in her canvas jacket. Mrs. Ashcroft? Delphine. Show me. She led him. Past the pasture. Past the fence. Down to the water. He stopped when he saw the flags. For a long time he did not speak. Then he whispered. Something she did not catch. What? She said. He turned to her. His face had changed. She could see it. The tired eyes were wide now. Very wide. Ma'am, he said. Yes. How many did you say? 400 marked. Probably more. He looked back at the swamp. He said, softly, almost reverently, Oh my God. And then, louder. Do not cut another one until I come back. Do you understand me? Do not touch another one. He turned. He started walking back to the truck. Fast. Where are you going? Delphine called. He looked over his shoulder. He was almost running now. To get someone who knows what this is. He climbed into the truck. He slammed the door, and as he drove away, faster than the dirt road wanted him to go, Delphine stood at the edge of the swamp, in the cold October air, and she understood. She had been right. Whatever was buried under her swamp, under her 40 acres of useless, cursed, worthless land, was something, was really something, and her life, her quiet, careful, widow's life, was over. A new one was about to begin. She just did not know yet, just how much it was going to cost her. Wyatt Coleman came back 3 days later. He was not alone. An older man sat in the passenger seat of his truck. 60s, silver mustache, a leather notebook on his lap. His name was Bernard Ashwood. He had milled specialty wood for 40 years. He had seen almost everything. Almost. Delphine met them at the porch. She had made coffee, because that was what her mother had taught her to do. When strangers arrived at your door, with news you were not sure you wanted to hear, you made coffee. Wyatt did not want coffee. Show us, he said. She showed them. Bernard walked slowly. He stopped at the water's edge. He looked at the flags. He looked at the cut log still lying on the bank. He knelt down. He touched the fresh sawn end. He rubbed the wood between his fingers. He brought his fingers to his nose. He smelled the wood. He closed his eyes. Delphine watched him. She did not breathe. Bernard stood up slowly. His knees popped. He looked at her. Mrs. Ashcroft, he said. Yes. Do you know what this is? No. This tree was cut a long time ago, before any of us were born, before our grandparents were born. This tree came down, when this valley looked different than it looks now. Delphine's throat was dry. How can you tell? She asked. Because I know wood, Bernard said. And because trees like this size, this kind, don't grow here anymore. Haven't grown here in about 100 years. Wyatt was standing behind him, his hands in his pockets, trying not to look excited. Failing. Ma'am, Bernard said, can I ask you something? Please. Do you plan to sell these logs, as they come out, to a wholesaler? I thought I might. Bernard shook his head, slowly, firmly. Don't. Why not? He looked out at the water, at the flags, at 40 acres of what everyone had been told was worthless. Because if you do that, he said, someone else will get very rich, and you will get almost nothing. Delphine felt her stomach drop. What do I do? She whispered. Bernard turned back to her. You learn, he said. You learn how to pull them right. You learn how to dry them right. You learn how to mill them right. You learn how to sell them right. And it will take you years, and you will make mistakes, and it will nearly break you. He paused. But if you do it, you will not just have wood. You will have something almost nobody in this country still has. What? A story, Bernard said. You will have a story. He tipped his hat. He walked back to the truck. And Delphine Ashcroft stood there, 67 years old, in the wet grass of her useless South 40. And she understood. The work had not begun yet. The work was just about to begin. She made her first big mistake in the spring. She wanted to move fast, because that was who she was. She had spent 44 years in hospitals. When something needed doing, you did it. You did not wait. So when the ground firmed enough, she and Wyatt pulled 27 logs. In 3 weeks, they lined them up beside the barn. Enormous, black, beautiful. Delphine walked among them at sunset. She could not stop smiling. She had done this. Her hands, her land, her stubbornness. She called Rosalind. Roz, come see. Rosalind came. She stood beside the logs. She whistled softly. Del, she said, you did this. We did. They stood together, 2 old women, in front of a small mountain of dark wood. Neither of them heard the first crack. But 3 days later, Delphine heard it. She was drinking her morning coffee on the porch. And a sound came from the yard. Sharp, loud, like a rifle. She set the coffee down. She walked out. She found the crack running down the length of the largest log. From one end, almost to the middle, she stood there, very still. Then she heard the second crack. Behind her, she turned. Another log. Another split. She started walking faster. From log to log, log to log, log. By that afternoon, 15 of the 27 had begun to check, to split, to warp. Delphine sat down in the wet grass. She put her face in her hands. Because she had done exactly what Bernard warned her not to do. She had pulled them too fast. She had not learned first. She had not dried them right. And her beautiful logs, her impossible logs, were becoming firewood. Wyatt found her there an hour later. He did not say anything at first. He just sat down beside her, in the grass, both of them looking at the ruined pile. Finally he said, "How many?" 15. Maybe more by tomorrow. He nodded. He did not tell her she was foolish. He did not tell her she should have listened. He did not need to. He just said, "Okay, now we know what not to do." Delphine looked at him. Her eyes were wet. "Wyatt." "Yeah. I don't know if I can afford to keep going." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Ma'am, can I tell you something?" "Yes. My daddy pulled river logs for 30 years. He taught me," he said. "Every man who ever pulled buried wood broke half his heart doing it. The first time, because the first time, you always pull too much, too fast. You always do. And the second time? The second time, you do better." She looked at him. "You do better," he repeated. Quietly, Delphine wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Then she stood up. "All right," she said. "Then we do better." The recovery slowed after that. They built proper drying racks. Wyatt showed her how to seal the ends of the logs with wax, to slow the moisture loss, to keep the wood from splitting from the inside out. He taught her how to stack, how to space, how to shade, how to wait. Delphine hated waiting, but she waited. Weeks became months. She checked the stacks every morning. Some logs held, some did not, but more held than had held before. She was learning. She was learning. The number of flags in the swamp kept climbing. 600, 800. By the middle of the second year, Delphine had marked over 1,000. She sat with Rosalind at the kitchen table one evening, the lamp between them, her notebook open. "Roz." "Yes. There are so many. I know. I don't understand how they got here." Rosalind was quiet. She turned her teacup between her hands. Then she said, "Delaware. There's an old man. In the village. Thaddeus. You've met him. Once. He knows things. About this land. Things nobody else remembers." Delphine looked at her friend. "I think you should go see him," Rosalind said. "I think it's time." Delphine drove to Thaddeus Holbrook's house on a Tuesday morning. It was small, white, set back from the road behind two enormous walnut trees. Smoke rose from the chimney. A gray cat sat on the porch. She knocked. He answered. He did not seem surprised. "Mrs. Ashcroft." "Mr. Holbrook. Come in." He led her to the kitchen. He poured her coffee without asking. He sat down across from her. He looked at her with those same wet, old, kind eyes. "You've been counting," he said. "How did you know?" "Rosalind." "Ah." He wrapped his hands around his own cup. His hands were shaking. Just a little. "You want to know," he said. "Yes." He nodded. "Once." "All right," he said. "It's time somebody knew. Before I go." Delphine set down her coffee, because she understood. This was not going to be a small story. Thaddeus took a breath. "I want to say something first," he said. "What I'm about to tell you is what my father told me. When I was a boy, he said it was true. He said he saw it with his own eyes. But I want you to understand. This is a story from the valley. From a long, long time ago. Some of it may be legend. Some of it may be truth. I cannot tell you which is which. I understand. He nodded again. My father was born in this valley. In 1892, when he was a young man, there was a lot of timber cutting here, all up and down this valley. Big companies came in. They hired men, local men, poor men, men who needed work. He paused. There was a piece of land, he said, owned by a family from the city. They didn't live here. They just owned it. They hired a group of workers to cut the timber. About a dozen men. Maybe more. They worked all summer. Cut down some of the biggest trees this valley has ever seen. Stacked them. Ready to move. He stopped. What happened? Delphine asked. The men were never paid. Delphine felt her throat tighten. The owners, Thaddeus said, sent word from the city. Said the price of lumber had fallen. Said they could not pay what they had promised. Offered a fraction. The men said no. Words were exchanged. The owners sent men of their own to move the logs without paying. He looked at his hands. And the workers, he said, did something that the valley never forgot. Delphine waited. They rolled the logs into the swamp, Thaddeus said. All of them, every one they had cut, all summer's work, pushed them into the water, where nobody could reach them, where nobody could sell them, because the workers said, if we don't get paid, nobody gets rich off our labor. He stopped. And then there was a storm, he said. That night, a bad one. Water rose fast. Some of the men were still working, still rolling logs. 3 of them didn't come home. Delphine put her hand over her mouth. My father, Thaddeus said, was one of the men who survived. He was 15 years old. He never spoke of it much, but when he did, he said the swamp took his friends and swallowed their labor, and the owners never came back. He looked up at her. His eyes were wet again. That's what's under your water, he said. Mrs. Ashcroft, that's what you found. Delphine could not speak. For a long time, neither of them could. Finally she whispered, the families, what about them? Are there descendants still here? Some, yes. Names change. People move. But some are still in this valley. Some know the story. Some do not. Delphine sat very still. She was thinking, not about wood, not about money, not about her aching back or her stained hands. She was thinking about 3 men, in a storm, 100 years ago, rolling logs into black water. Because they refused to let their work be stolen. She was thinking about their wives, waiting at home, their children, their names, now half forgotten in a valley that had moved on. Mr. Holbrook. Yes. Whatever I make from this, I want the families to know, and I want their part. He looked at her for a long time. Then he set down his coffee. He reached across the table. He took her hand. He did not say anything. He did not have to. She drove home in silence. The road blurred. She had to pull over. She sat in her truck, on the shoulder of a country road, and she cried. For men she had never met. For labor that had been stolen. For a valley that had almost forgotten. She was not just pulling logs anymore. She was pulling the past. Out of the mud. And the past, as she was about to learn, did not always want to come. Cordelia called that weekend. Delphine almost did not answer. Her heart was still full, still raw. She did not have room for another argument. But she picked up, because she was a mother, and mothers pick up. Cordelia. Mom. Yes. Are you okay? Delphine paused. Yes. Why? You sound different. Different how? I don't know. Just different. Delphine looked out the window, at her ruined pasture, her working barn, her strange new life. I've been busy, she said. Doing what? Delphine took a breath. And then, for the first time, she told her daughter. Not everything, but enough. She told her about the flags, about the first cut, About the mistake with the 27 logs. About Wyatt. About Bernard. About the count that kept climbing. Cordelia was quiet on the other end. When Delphine finished, there was a long silence. Then Cordelia said, softly, "Mom, yes, you sound happy." Delphine's eyes stung, because it had been so long since anyone had said that to her. "Yes," she whispered, "I think I am." The two of them stayed on the phone a while longer. They did not fix anything. They did not solve anything. But something opened, just a little. Between them, it was a beginning. Delphine held onto it. That summer, the threats began. They started small. A man Delphine had never seen before drove slowly past her farmhouse. Twice, 3 times. He did not stop. He did not wave. He just drove past. Then a car appeared at the end of her driveway one evening. Its headlights on, its engine running, for almost 20 minutes. Then it drove away. Then someone called her house at 2 in the morning and said nothing, just breathed, and hung up. Delphine told herself she was imagining things. Old woman, big property, living alone. Every little thing feels like a threat. Then the letter came. It arrived in a plain white envelope. No return address, just her name, typed. Inside was a single sheet of paper, also typed. It said, "Mrs. Ashcroft, an interested party wishes to purchase your property in full. Generous offer attached. Response requested within 10 days. Attached was a check, $250,000, made out to her, signed by a man she had never heard of. Victor Grady. Delphine sat at her kitchen table. She held the check between her fingers, $250,000. She had paid $168. It was a profit, a big one, enough to move somewhere quiet, to live comfortably, to stop. She stared at the check. She thought about her ruined logs, her aching back, her stained hands. She thought about 3 men in a storm 100 years ago. She thought about Bernard's voice. "You will have a story." She stood up. She walked to the kitchen sink. She turned on the faucet. She held the check under the running water. The ink began to bleed. She watched the numbers dissolve. She watched Victor Grady's signature run down the drain. Then she tore the paper into small, careful pieces, and she dropped them into the trash. She did not know it yet, but Victor Grady was not a man who accepted no. Victor Grady came to see her the next week. He did not send a letter. He did not call. He just drove up her driveway one Tuesday afternoon in a silver truck that cost more than her house. He got out. He was tall, 58 years old, silver hair, expensive coat, a face that had learned, long ago, how to look friendly, even when it wasn't. "Mrs. Ashcroft, Mr. Grady, you didn't cash my check." "No." "May I ask why?" "I don't want to sell." He smiled, the kind of smile that did not reach the eyes. "Ma'am, may I be direct?" "Please. You are 67 years old. You are a widow. You are trying to run a lumber operation, out of a swamp, with no formal training, no connections, and no infrastructure. This will not end well for you." Delphine looked at him. She thought, "I have seen men like you my whole life. Doctors who thought they knew more than nurses. Administrators who thought money was the only language. Men who mistook softness for weakness. I have outlasted every single one of them." "Mr. Grady." "Yes. Get off my property." His smile flickered, just barely. "Ma'am, I want to help you. Get off my property." 250 was generous. "But I am authorized to go higher. Perhaps 3. Get." She took 1 step forward. Another step. 5. Another. "Property." Victor Grady looked at her for a long moment. Then his smile came back, bigger, colder. "Mrs. Ashcroft," he said, "you will regret this." He got in his truck. He drove away. Delphine stood on her porch. Her hands were shaking. She was not afraid. She was angry. She had not been angry, truly angry, in a very long time. Felt good. The first bad thing happened a week later. Wyatt arrived one morning to find that the main winch cable had been cut. Cleanly, with bolt cutters. Sometime in the night, he stood over it for a long time. Then he called Delphine outside. Look! She looked. Her stomach dropped. Who would do this, she said, even though she knew. Somebody who wants you to quit. Well, she said, I don't quit. Wyatt nodded slowly. No, ma'am, he said. I don't think you do. They replaced the cable. They started locking the equipment at night. Delphine had never locked anything on the property before. Not the barn. Not the shed. Not the equipment. She did not want to start. But she started. Because it was not just her property anymore. It was her promise. To 3 men she had never met. And she would not let anyone break it. The second bad thing happened 2 weeks after that. The drying barn caught fire. It was 3 in the morning. Delphine woke to the smell. She threw on her coat. She ran out into the yard. Flames were coming out of the small barn, where they had been storing the dried lumber. The boards they had spent months sealing, and stacking and turning and watching. The wood that had survived. That had made it. That represented every hour of every day, since the 27-log disaster. She grabbed the garden hose. She ran toward the fire. She sprayed. She sprayed. She sprayed. She was screaming without realizing it. Somewhere between anger and prayer. Wyatt arrived within 20 minutes. He had heard the sirens. He had known. The volunteer fire department came from the village. By dawn, the fire was out. Half the barn was gone. A third of the dried lumber was ruined, blackened, warped by heat. Delphine sat in the yard, in her nightgown, under her coat, covered in soot. Wyatt sat beside her. Was it? They found accelerant, he said. So it was... Yeah. They could prove it? They could prove there was a fire. They can't prove who started it. Delphine closed her eyes. She wanted to cry. She had earned the right to cry. But she did not cry. She just sat. And she thought. Not about giving up. Not about selling. She thought, I am so much older than he thinks I am. And I have survived so much worse than a fire. Rosalind arrived an hour later. She had heard from a neighbor. She drove over immediately. She did not knock. She just came in through the kitchen door, walked out into the yard, and sat down beside her friend. She did not say anything for a long time. She just took Delphine's soot-blackened hand and held it. Finally Delphine said, Roz. Yes, something happened to you. On your way here. Rosalind was quiet. Then she said, How did you know? You have a look. Rosalind sighed. She reached into her coat pocket. She pulled out a folded piece of paper. Someone left this on my windshield, she said. At the grocery store, yesterday. Delphine unfolded it. It said in the same typed letters as the offer, Tell your friend to accept the offer. This does not have to get worse. Delphine stared at the paper. Something rose in her chest. Not fear. Not fear. Rage. Cold. Pure. Nurse's rage. The kind that had made her yell at drunk doctors, and bad administrators, and insurance companies, for 44 years. She stood up. She walked to the barn. She went inside. She came back out with the notebook. Her notebook. The one that had every log, every flag, every count. Roz. Yes. Call Wyatt. Call Thaddeus. Get them here. Today. What are you going to do? Delphine looked out at the swamp, at the sun rising over the black water. I am going to make a plan, she said. And I am going to stop being afraid. They gathered that afternoon at the farmhouse table. 4 of them. 3 old. 1 young. Delphine at the head of the table. Rosalind to her left. Thaddeus across from her. Wyatt to her right. Coffee for everyone. Nobody drinking it. He wants me to give up, Delphine said. So he can buy this land for nothing. Pull the logs himself. Sell them for millions. And nobody in the valley will ever see a dime. Thaddeus's hands closed slowly around his cup. My father, he said, rolled logs into that water, so that men like Victor Grady would never get rich off his sweat. Silence. Then Wyatt said, so we don't let him. How? Rosalind said. Dell is in danger. You saw the barn. Then we don't leave her alone, Wyatt said. Somebody's here, at the property, every night. From now on, I can take some nights. My brother can take some. I can take some, Rosalind said. You are 65 years old, Delphine said. So are you. So, I take some. Delphine did not argue. Thaddeus set down his cup. I want to help, he said. Thaddeus, you are 80. I am 80, and I have waited my whole life to do one thing for my father. Let me do it. Delphine's eyes stung. What do you want to do? She asked. I have papers, he said. In my house. From my father. Old ones. He kept them. All his life. There is a list. Of the men who were there. That summer. With him. Names. Ages. Where they lived. He looked at her. You said you wanted to find the families. Yes. I can help you. Start. Delphine reached across the table. She took Thaddeus's hand. She looked at Rosalind, who was already crying. Silently, as only widows know how to cry, she looked at Wyatt, whose eyes were fixed on the table, trying not to feel too much, and failing. Then this is what we do, she said. We do not stop pulling logs. We do not stop drying. We do not stop selling. We take turns watching the property. We keep records of every threat, of every incident, in case we need them. And we start looking for the families, Thaddeus said. And we start looking for the families. She looked around the table. 3 old people, and 1 young man, around her kitchen, in a farmhouse, in a valley, trying to right a wrong. From 100 years ago, she thought her heart might break, in the best possible way. That night, Delphine walked down to the swamp alone. The moon was up, the reeds silver, the water black. She stood at the edge. She spoke, out loud, to no one. I am a widow, she said. I am 67 years old. I have lost the man I loved most in this world. I have nothing left to lose, and that, Mr. Grady, makes me the most dangerous person you have ever met. She stood there, a long time, then she turned, and she walked back to the farmhouse. She locked the door for the first time in months, and she went to bed, and for the first time, since the fire, since the letter, since Victor Grady's silver truck had rolled up her driveway, she slept without dreams. Winter came hard that year. The swamp froze at the edges. The reeds turned brown. The wind moved through the valley like something searching. Delphine did not stop. She wore 2 coats, 3 pairs of socks, gloves with the fingers cut off, so she could still hold her notebook, so she could still write. Wyatt taught her to pull logs in the cold. Slower, more careful. The frozen ground helped in some places, held the equipment, gave the cables something to bite against. They pulled 43 logs that winter. Only 2 split. Delphine wrote the numbers in her notebook. Her small, careful nurse's handwriting. Beside each entry, a note. Species suspected. Condition. Estimated yield. She was becoming something. She was not sure what yet, but she was becoming it. Rosalind moved into the farmhouse in January. It was not planned. She came over one snowy evening, to bring soup, to check on her friend, and a storm blew in, and the roads iced over, and she stayed the night. And then the next night, and then the next. By the end of the week, her toothbrush was in the bathroom. Her slippers were beside the couch. Her jar of instant coffee was next to Delphine's on the counter. Neither of them mentioned it. They just lived together, 2 widows, in a warm kitchen, making bread, making lists, making a life. One night in February, they sat by the fire, a blizzard howling outside. Delphine looked over at her friend. Reading. in an old armchair, silver hair loose around her face. She thought, I have not been this happy in 20 years. She did not say it, but she felt it, and Rosalind, who had known her for 50 years, looked up and smiled, as if she had heard. The village began to change toward her. It was slow. For months, Delphine had been the strange widow, on the old Whitcomb place, doing something people whispered about but did not understand. Then, little by little, things shifted. Mrs. Peabody, who ran the post office, started asking about the swamp, not to gossip, to know. The man at the hardware store, who used to hand her boxes of flags, without a word, started asking if she needed anything else, if she was doing okay, if she needed help lifting. An old woman Delphine had never met knocked on her door one morning, with a loaf of banana bread. She said her name was Lorraine. She said her great-grandfather had worked timber in this valley. She said, Thaddeus told me some of what you're doing. She said, I just wanted to say thank you. Delphine stood in her doorway, holding the warm loaf. She could not speak. Lorraine patted her hand and left. The banana bread was the best Delphine had ever eaten. She cried while she ate it. She could not tell anyone why. Cordelia came to visit in March. She had said she was coming. For weeks, she had never said when. Then one Saturday, a silver car turned up the driveway. Slowly, uncertain, Delphine was in the yard, splitting kindling. She stopped. She set down the axe. Cordelia got out. 30 years old. Nice coat. Nice shoes. Not the right shoes for a farm. Delphine noticed and smiled. They looked at each other across the yard. Mom! Cordelia! Neither of them moved. Then Cordelia said, her voice cracking, You look different. Different how? You look strong. Delphine felt something warm move through her chest. She held out her arms. Cordelia walked, then ran. Across the yard, into her mother's arms. They stood there, in the wet March grass, holding each other. For a long, long time, Cordelia was the one who broke first. I'm sorry, Mom. For what? For calling that assisted living place. Oh, honey. For thinking I knew what was best. Cordelia. For not seeing you. Delphine held her daughter's face in her hands. Cordelia. Yes. I did not see me either. Not for a long time. Cordelia laughed. Wet. Broken. Real. Show me. She said. Show you what? All of it. Delphine took her daughter's hand, and she showed her the barn, the stacks of drying wood, the workshop where Wyatt had begun helping her build small tables, the little office where her notebook lived. Now 3 notebooks, all filled. She showed her the swamp, the flags, the winch, the pallets stacked with recovered logs, waiting to be cut. She showed her the pieces of dried, milled wood, the color of dark honey, the grain running long and deep and beautiful. Cordelia touched a board. She looked at her mother. Mom, this is beautiful. I know. Where does it come from? From under the water. From a long time ago. Cordelia was quiet a moment. Then she said, Mom, there is something different about you, and it's not the wood. It's not the farm. What is it, then? Cordelia looked at her. You aren't waiting anymore. Delphine felt her eyes fill. She had not known, until this moment, that her daughter had seen it. All those years, the waiting, the way it had swallowed her. She pulled Cordelia close. No, baby, she said. I am not waiting anymore. Thaddeus and Delphine spent the winter finding families. They worked at the kitchen table. In the evenings, with his father's list, and a laptop Wyatt had helped them set up. There were 12 names on the list. Some had died out. Some had moved away. Some had descendants scattered across the country, in cities Delphine had never heard of. But some were still in the valley. The first family they found was named Whitaker. The great-granddaughter lived 20 miles away. In a small blue house. She was 54 years old. Her name was Marlene. She worked at a bakery. She had never heard the story. Delphine and Thaddeus drove out one Sunday afternoon. Marlene answered the door in a flour-dusted apron. "Can I help you?" Thaddeus took off his hat. "Ma'am," he said, "my name is Thaddeus Holbrook, and this is Mrs. Delphine Ashcroft. We came to tell you about your great-grandfather." Marlene looked at them. "My great-grandfather? Yes. I never met him." "No, ma'am. He died. Before you were born. Before your father was born." She stared at them. "You'd better come in." They sat at her kitchen table. She poured them coffee. She listened. Thaddeus told her the story. All of it. The summer of the timber. The betrayal. The storm. The 3 men who did not come home. Marlene did not cry. She just listened, her hands very still around her cup. When he was finished, she said, softly, "My father used to say, his grandfather was a hard man, sad, bitter. He never told us why." She looked at Delphine. "Now we know why." Delphine reached across the table. She took Marlene's hand. "His name is not forgotten," she said. "Ma'am, his name is not forgotten. I promise you." Marlene finally cried then. Not much, just a little, but it was a little more than her family had cried. In 100 years. They found 7 more families that spring. Some welcomed them, some did not. One man slammed the door in their faces, said the past should stay in the past. Delphine understood. She did not push, but most listened. Most had the same quiet reaction Marlene had. A long silence, a shake of the head, a whispered, "So that was it. That was the thing my grandmother would never talk about." Delphine wrote every name down. She wrote every response. She wrote every address. She was making a record. For history. For herself. For the future. The 7th family was named Callaghan. The great-grandson was named Henry. He was 72 years old. He lived alone in a farmhouse smaller than Delphine's. He walked with a limp. He had lost his wife 2 years ago, like Delphine had lost Harold. He listened to the story. At the end, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "My great-grandfather. His name was Peter Callaghan. He was one of the 3 who drowned." Thaddeus lowered his eyes. "I know that name, sir," he said. "My father spoke of him, often." Henry looked out the window. "You know what the worst part is," he said. "Tell us." "Nobody in my family, in 4 generations, ever went back to that swamp. Nobody. It was like it was cursed. It was like his ghost was there. And we all knew, without ever saying it, do not go near that water." Delphine felt something cold move through her. Henry looked at her. "You have been going there, every day, for years." "Yes. Why?" she thought. Then she said, softly, "Because someone needed to." Henry's eyes filled. "Ma'am," he said, "when you take the last log out of that water, if it is not too much to ask, would you let me know?" "Yes. I would like to stand there, when it is done." "You will," she said. "You will stand there. Promise." Spring came slow. The ice melted. The flags rose out of the water. The count went on. 1,200 flags. Then 13. Then 14. Wyatt bought new equipment. A second winch. A small excavator that could reach farther in. Delphine paid for it out of the money from the first sales. She had begun selling. Slowly, carefully. Small pieces. Tabletops. Mantles. Slabs sold to furniture makers. Each one with a card. Handwritten. This wood came from the Ashcroft swamp. It waited under water for over a century. It carries the memory of the men who cut it, and the memory of the women who brought it back. People began to ask for pieces by name. An interior designer from 3 states away drove up one weekend to see the operation. She left with a truckload of slabs and a promise to come back. A furniture maker in the city called, asked for exclusive rights to a batch. Offered a good price. Delphine said no. She said she wanted her wood in many houses. Not just one shop. He respected that. He bought a smaller order and came back the next month for another. The barn started filling in a different way. Not with rough logs, with finished lumber, waiting to become something, waiting to matter. The threats from Victor Grady stopped. First, Delphine thought maybe he had given up. She was wrong. She learned the truth in April, from a sheriff's deputy who came to the farmhouse one morning. He knocked. He took off his hat. He said, "Mrs. Ashcroft, I wanted to come tell you in person." "Tell me what?" "Victor Grady was arrested this week." Delphine stared at him. "For what?" "Fraud. Multiple counts. Turns out he'd been running the same kind of pressure operation on properties all over the state. Threats, fires, cut cables. What he did to you was just one of many. Somebody finally put the pieces together." He looked at her. "The fire at your barn," he said, "is going to be part of the case. If you're willing." Delphine did not hesitate. "I am willing. Ma'am, it won't be easy. There'll be depositions. Maybe a trial. Could take a year." "Deputy." "Yes. I have already waited 100 years for justice for men I never met. I can wait a year for justice for myself." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, quietly, "Ma'am, I hope, when I am your age, I have half your steel." Delphine smiled. "Deputy, when you are my age, you will have earned yours." He tipped his hat. He left. She stood on the porch. She watched his cruiser roll down the driveway, and she thought, well, that is one thing done. Then she went inside to make lunch, because a woman still has to eat. The 1700th log came out on a cold October morning, almost exactly 4 years, to the day, since the first. Delphine knew its number before she walked out to the swamp. She had been counting down for months. 1698, 99, 1700, the last one. She had chosen where to end. Deliberately, there were more logs. She knew there were. Deeper, farther out, older maybe. She would leave them, because the number 1700 had been the count of her survey, her ledger, her promise. And a woman keeps her promises. She dressed slowly that morning. Warm layers, her oldest boots, her lucky gloves. She walked out into the cold. Wyatt was already there, setting up the winch, checking the cable. Rosalind was there, in her own coat, holding a thermos of coffee. Thaddeus was there, 81 now, frielier than he had been, but steady, his hat over his heart. And Henry Callaghan was there, in a black coat, standing very still, his hands folded in front of him, and behind them, down the driveway, cars. Delphine had not asked for anyone, but they had come. Marlene Whitaker was there, and 5 other family descendants, and Lorraine with her banana bread, and the man from the hardware store, and Mrs. Peabody from the post office, and her daughter, Cordelia, and her grandchild, a small boy of 4, bundled in a red coat. They stood back, respectful, silent. Delphine walked to the water. She stopped at the edge. She turned. She looked at all of them. She did not know what to say, so she said nothing. She just nodded, and she walked into the water. Wyatt started the winch. The cable tightened. The old, familiar hum filled the cold air. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the swamp gave up its last numbered secret. Bubbles rose. Reeds bent. A dark shape moved beneath the water. Delphine watched. She was not thinking about wood. She was thinking about 3 men in a storm, 100 years ago, rolling logs into black water, because they refused to be robbed. She was thinking about Harold. On his last night, whispering, "Don't stop." She had not understood then. She understood now. She was thinking about the moment, 4 years ago, when she had stood ankle-deep in the same water, alone, and made a promise to no one. She had kept it. The log rose. One end broke the surface. Then more. Then the whole trunk. Mud rolling off. Water streaming down. Wyatt guided it slowly onto the bank. He shut off the winch. Silence returned. The wind moved through the reeds. Delphine walked to the log. She knelt down beside it. She placed her weathered hand on the wet wood. For a long moment, she did not speak. Then she stood up. She turned to face the people gathered on the bank. And she said, just loud enough for them to hear, "That is the last one." Nobody clapped. Nobody cheered. Because it was not that kind of moment. Instead, slowly, Henry Callaghan walked forward. He came to the log. He knelt down beside it. He placed his own hand on the wood. His shoulders began to shake. And Delphine did what a nurse does. She knelt beside him. She wrapped her arms around him. She held him, while he wept for a great-grandfather he had never met, in a storm 100 years before, whose labor had at last, finally, come home. They had a gathering in the barn. Not a party. Something quieter. Rosalind had made bread. Lorraine had brought pies. Someone had brought cider. Someone else had brought a fiddle. But no one played it yet. They stood in the barn, beside stacks of finished, milled, honey-colored wood, and they talked, quietly, as people do when something important has just ended. Delphine walked among them. Marlene took her hand. Henry hugged her. Long silent, the man from the hardware store nodded at her. From across the room. She nodded back. Cordelia's little boy tugged on her jacket. "Grandma." "Yes, sweetheart." "Is this your wood?" "Yes. It is very pretty." "Thank you." "Can I have some?" Delphine laughed. For the first time that day. "You can have a whole tree, baby." Cordelia came up behind her, put a hand on her shoulder, said, "Mom." "Yes. I am so proud of you." Delphine could not answer. She just leaned back, against her daughter's hand, and she let herself be held. That evening, Bernard Ashwood came. He had heard. He had driven up, late, just to see. He walked into the barn, alone, where Delphine was closing up for the night. He stood among her stacks, silver mustache, leather notebook still in his hand. After all these years, he looked at the boards. He looked at her. "Delphine. Bernard. I have been in this business 40 years. I know. I have never seen a story like this one." She smiled tiredly. "I told you," he said. "Remember, 4 years ago, I said, you will have a story." "I remember." He shook his head slowly. "I did not know it would be this story." She looked at him. "Bernard." "Yes. How much do you think it is worth?" "Now, all of it. The dried inventory. What is here?" He was quiet a while. Then he said, "If you sold it all off, slowly, over the next several years, to the right buyers, at the right prices, yes, you would clear over $200,000, possibly more." Delphine let out a long, slow breath. She had paid $168 for the farm. The wood alone was worth more. But not just the wood. The story. Bernard had been right about that. The story was worth something too. It was worth the pies people brought, the banana bread, the little boy holding her hand, the old man weeping on a wet log. She looked at Bernard. "Bernard." "Yes. I am not selling all of it. Not to a wholesaler. Not to anyone. No. Some of it. I will keep making things from. With Wyatt. Small pieces. Beautiful ones. To sell here. To furniture makers. Slowly. Over years." "That sounds right. And some of it, I am giving away." Bernard raised his eyebrows. "To whom?" "To the families. The descendants. 12 pieces. One for each of the men who worked that summer. A table. A mantle. A white slab. Something beautiful. Something they can look at every day. Something that says, 'Your grandfather did not disappear.'" Bernard was quiet a long time. Then he said, very softly, "Delphine Ashcroft, you are not a lumber woman." "No, you are a healer." She smiled. "Well," she said, "I was a nurse." He shook his head. "That is not what I mean." He touched the top board on the nearest stack. He said, "This is not lumber. Not really. This is medicine." He tipped his hat. He left. Delphine stood in the barn a long time after he was gone, looking at her stacks, her 4 years of work, her medicine. The Historical Society came the following spring. They came because of Thaddeus, because he had mentioned, in passing, that among his father's papers there had been some things, old things, that might interest a person who cared about the valley. The woman who came was named Miss Prendergast. She was in her 40s, wire-rimmed glasses, careful hands. She went through Thaddeus's papers. She went through the papers Delphine had put together, the list of families found, the stories collected, the photographs some had shared. She sat with them for hours. At the end, she looked up. She said, "This is the most complete record of a labor incident from this period, in this county, that has ever been assembled." Delphine and Thaddeus looked at each other. "Are you sure?" Thaddeus said. "Sir, I have been doing this work for 20 years. Yes, I am sure." She took the folders. Very gently, she said, "We will build a display in the Historical Society. We will make sure the names are recorded, publicly, permanently." Delphine nodded. She could not speak, because 100 years of silence was ending, in her farmhouse kitchen, over coffee, with an old man who had waited his whole life to do this one thing, for his father. Delphine gave a piece of wood to the Historical Society for their display. It was a small, polished slab from the 1700th log. She had asked Wyatt to prepare it, with special care. On a small brass plaque, she had asked for these words to be written, "From the Ashcroft swamp, in memory of the 12 men who worked here, and the 3 who did not come home. Their labor waited 100 years, and was not forgotten." She did not put her own name on the plaque. She did not need to. Thaddeus died the following September, peacefully, in his sleep, 2 years after the last log came out. His funeral was small. Delphine was there, and Rosalind, and Wyatt, and Henry Callaghan, and Marlene, and a few others whose great-grandfathers had once, long ago, rolled logs into black water. They stood at the grave, in the cold October air. Delphine held Henry's hand. She thought about how life did that, sometimes, brought you people, in the last chapters, who felt, somehow, like family, even though you had never known them before. She had come to this valley 2 years after Harold's death, believing she had already lost everyone she was meant to love. She had been so wrong, blessedly, beautifully, completely wrong. On the morning of her 72nd birthday, Delphine woke before dawn. She made coffee. She sat at the kitchen table Wyatt had built her, from a single slab of the 1700th log, long wide, honey-colored beneath the dark stain, with a crack down one side, that Wyatt did not hide, that he stabilized, and left, so anyone who ran their fingers along the wood could feel the story. The sun came up slowly over the eastern fields. Light moved across the wood, illuminating the grain, warming the crack that had not been hidden. Rosalind came into the kitchen, in her robe, her silver hair loose. "Delaware. Morning. Coffee." "Yes." Rosalind poured herself a cup. She sat down, across from her friend. They did not speak for a long time. Then Cordelia came in. She was staying for the week. She was already dressed. She kissed her mother's cheek. Then her little boy, now 6, sleepy-eyed, in pajamas printed with dinosaurs, climbed onto the bench beside Delphine, leaned his head against her shoulder. Wyatt would be by later. Henry would come for lunch. Marlene had baked her a cake. Delphine looked at all of them. At her kitchen, full. At her wood, warm. At her life, so different from the one she had almost accepted, when Preston Wren had shown her a swamp, and said, "Nothing much you can do with that section," because she had done something. She had done everything. She thought of Harold, as she often did, not with the sharp grief of the early years, but with something softer now, fuller. Harold, I found a new home. I did not stop. She looked down at the wood beneath her hands, at a crack that had been left, on purpose, because a story is more beautiful when you can see where it broke, and where it held. Outside, beyond the pasture, beyond the fence, the swamp lay quiet. Reeds moved gently in the morning air, water still, dark, somewhere beneath its surface. Other logs still slept, ones she had chosen not to pull. That was all right. Some things were meant to stay, because the treasure, she had learned, was never really the wood. The treasure was Rosalind, in a robe, across a table. The treasure was Cordelia. Finally seeing her, the treasure was a small boy, half asleep, against her shoulder. The treasure was 12 families, who now knew what had happened to their grandfathers. The treasure was a woman who had believed her life was over at 67, and who had learned, in a swamp, with a rebar, and a friend, and an old man's story, that her life had not been over at all. It had just been waiting for her to walk into the water and begin. The little boy stirred against her shoulder. He looked up at her sleepily. "Grandma." "Yes, baby. What are you smiling about?" She placed her hand on the smooth wood of her table. She looked out the window, at the light, at the fields, at all the mornings still to come. "Everything, sweetheart. I'm smiling about everything." Outside, the morning kept coming. The sun rose higher, and Delphine Ashcroft, widow, nurse, recoverer of forgotten things, was finally, fully, home.